Hey, so I just wanted to give a quick demo on how you do a squash migration in Django. There's a number of reasons you might want to do it. In my case, I basically have two reasons here for the Joomla project. One is that you can see we got a lot of migrations files here, over 20 of them. We also have some data migrations, and one of them was importing a CSV file and injecting some data into the database. That's fine. Like, technically this could live here forever, but I would really like to delete this file, this CSV file that was being used to initialize this data. And so once a migration goes all the way to production, it doesn't technically need to exist anymore. Sometimes you can end up in bad situations. If you're coding a migration where you're importing a function here, which has happened in the past, well, then what happens if that function that you're calling changes the code? Like, somebody edits that code. You could now have different behavior in like a review app than you would in staging or prod, because staging and prod already saw the old version of that function when the migration first ran, but now the function changed. So there's a number of like little things like that that you should generally avoid with migrations. You should always do things, even if you're copying and pasting code, just do it directly in here. In my case, I just don't like the CSV file. I'd like to get rid of it. It's probably a good time anyway. We have over 20 migrations. The more migrations you have, every time you build a review app, it's going to apply these migrations one by one to the database, and it's going to step through them one at a time. And so over time, that's going to cause review apps to slow down when you first generate them. It can also affect PyTest. When PyTest is running and it's initializing the test database, it's going to do the same thing. So I'd say for projects that stick around longer, once you get above 20 migrations, once every couple of months, it can be a good idea to do this. Could be do it app wide. I'd say 6 months is probably a good litmus test for that. So down here in the lower right-hand corner, it's simply Python server manage.py squash migrations and the name of the app. If I run that, okay, yes, I forgot a step there where you provide the app name, but also the migration you want to squash up to. So as you can see, it's saying, hey, this squash migration is going to replace all of these. Do you want to proceed? Just say yep, and it's done. So now if I come over here and I do a refresh, you'll see we have a 001 squashed now that just got created. And if I look at that, it is basically the current state of the database. It's as if we had created a new, in fact, one way you could theoretically do this manually is if you deleted all the migrations, generated a migration from scratch for the app as it exists today, you'd get the same file. The only thing that would be missing is this replaces part. So the replaces part tells Django, like, hey, if you're generating a review app for the first time and you come across this migration, know that this migration replaces all of these. And so therefore you can skip applying all these migrations and instead just apply this one. So what'll happen now is this will get merged. Once this migration has gone all the way to production, then you are actually free to go delete all of these files. And then what you actually do is you replace the replaces section with initial true, basically mirroring what the original init looks like. And then that way you can actually delete all the old migration files if you want to. You don't technically have to. Any migration I generate from here will actually, as you'll see with a lot of migrations, they always say what their parent is, so what it depends on. So any new migration that gets created next, it'll actually depend on this squashed migration instead of 0024, which was the prior one. So anyway, that's just a quick example of how you can do squash migrations. Oftentimes it can solve a lot of problems when things get muddy, especially once you start getting a long history of migration files, and especially if you run into a situation where because of a code change or because of something else going on, you feel like the migrations are broken and to fix them, you're going to have to like edit a migration file or something. Usually the simpler thing to do is just to squash instead of editing a migration or trying to go in there with a scalpel to figure out the right solution. Usually I find in those cases, just squash and that'll solve the problem for you. All right. That got merged, that got deployed. It's gone all the way from staging to prod. One other important thing to check there is what's happening with other branches. So if there's other PRs open where people have made migrations, but going off of the old, as you can see, the big long list here of 24 migrations. So if somebody created 0025 or 26 and they're on a branch, like you may want to have a little special handling there, which the easiest solution there is after we do what we're about to do, or actually, regardless of what we do right now, the quickest solution would be go to that pull request, pull it down or help the dev who's working with it, have them rebase, delete the migrations, regenerate the migrations. So once you do that, instead of it pointing to, like if we look at 23, you'll see, or 24 rather, 24 will point to 23. So we can see it depends on 23. So if this migration was on that branch, we could delete this file and then call make migrations. And instead of it pointing to 0023, it'll end up pointing to the squash migration that we just created. And then the only other thing you'd have to do then is delete and recreate the review app on Heroku. And so just making sure, doing that little gut check, making sure that there's nobody else around who's still dealing with those old migration files. So as long as that's true, which is true in this case, you'll see now we've got 2 migrations here. Let's see here, we got the squash and the init. There we go. So we got the init and the squash. And obviously the squash has a lot more things in it than in the init. But now what we can do is we can delete the replaces. Save that. Yeah, I'll delete the extra line. So now as you can see, these 2 files are effectively identical when it comes to the things at the top. Obviously the squash has a lot more operations because it's 24 files worth of operations. But other than that, they're the same. And so now the next thing I can do is I can go delete all these other files. Okay, and that's done. And so now the only other thing I want to do is, part of the reason for doing this was so I can delete this CSV file. So that's gone. And now if I do a git status-s, I've deleted all those files. And really the only thing I've done, well, that's going to show all the things that got deleted. Really the only change I've made is I made a 1-line change to the squash. And so now I can open this pull request. And now I've replaced it. I finished off the squash migration. It's also worth showing that this file is now pretty simple. It's just a bunch of create models with the fields exactly as they are. So if we jump through it, we're just creating all the models like we had created them. There is this one little change at the end, and that's because there was a run Python step in the middle. But again, part of the point of this squash migration is that run Python step didn't need to happen anymore, and we had cleaned it up previously. So the file is also quite a bit smaller, which means it's going to run a lot faster. Now we could rename this file back to 001 init, but only if it hasn't been used in another branch by another dev, meaning that there's a new migration file that depends on this one by its name. That's the case, actually, so I'm not going to bother renaming it. Doesn't really matter. But if you really cared that much, you could actually rename it as well if you wanted to. And that's it.